The US has again vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, the release of the remaining hostages and proper access for humanitarian aid. While the Council's 14 other members voted in favour, the US said the resolution failed to sufficiently condemn Hamas. Israel is ramping up its ground offensive against the militant group in Gaza City, with tanks pushing in deeper and airstrikes pounding buildings. Dozens of people have reportedly been killed. The entire territory is without phone and internet connections, making it dangerous for civilians, especially those on the move. About 250,000 Palestinians have been forced to flee to the south, but many parts are already overcrowded. The World Health Organization warns hospitals are on the brink of collapse. We can cross now to DW correspondent Emily Gordine. She's in the West Bank right now and is following developments for us. Emily, Israel is saying it's closed down a temporary evacuation route being used by Palestinians to flee Gaza City. What does that mean for civilians trying to get out? What's the latest that you're hearing?
Well, the Saladin road through which Palestinians were forcibly displaced essentially from Gaza City was only opened for about 48 hours to alleviate the pressure a little bit from the other route, the coastal route that people had been taking as they leave Gaza City. Now that only leaves one more route, that coastal route through which they can in fact leave if they want to. Many Gazans, though, do not want to leave. 500,000 Palestinians remain in Gaza City. Some say they don't want to leave because they've simply been displaced too many times. You have to keep in mind here that Gaza City has become essentially a hub for many Palestinians who had to flee from other areas of the Gaza Strip that have been designated evacuation areas or closed military zones. Other Palestinians who might want to leave Gaza City can't leave because they simply can't afford to leave. It is very expensive to leave. Of course, that puts more pressure on the humanitarian situation on the ground. Gaza City and the surrounding area had been officially designated as an area, or not designated, but officially declared an area where famine was unfolding, where famine was happening and is happening. And we know from the UN that no more aid has been entering the north of Gaza, specifically in Gaza City, since Friday, since the IDF closed the Zakim crossing, putting more pressure on the situation on the ground. And despite these humanitarian conditions, despite the humanitarian catastrophe that is essentially unfolding, and despite even criticism from Israel's own military establishment, the Israeli government seems adamant in pushing ahead with its operation to seize Gaza City.
Can you talk to us about how divided opinions are in Israel?
Well, Israeli society was divided long before October 7th, 2023, and long before this war. And these divisions, though, are now, of course, coming into play again. Sderot specifically is an example for being Netanyahu's stronghold. The people who live there tend to be ideologically aligned with him. They buy into the idea that Hamas can be defeated militarily. On the other hand, you have the families and friends of the hostages who have been campaigning throughout these 2 years for a deal. They believe that that is the only way of getting their loved ones back. Many of them also criticize the idea of defeating Hamas, since they are the ones who still hold the hostages captive. Defeating Hamas could then ultimately lead to the loss of the hostages. So their priority very much has been on a deal. They've been protesting that for months and months and months. Polls also show that they are backed up by a majority of Israelis. Between 60% and 70% have consistently polled in favor of reaching a ceasefire deal to bring the hostages back. There is also a small minority in Israel, and we saw that today at the Gaza border, that is protesting not just for the release of the hostages, but also because they just can't take the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza. That is a consequence of this war and of Israeli strikes and attacks on the territory. Now, these protests, but also these larger hostage ceasefire deal protests that we've seen countless times over the last 2 years, really, though have not really been heard much by the Israeli government, which has been adamant on pushing ahead militarily instead of reaching a ceasefire deal.
Emily, thank you so much for that update. That's DW correspondent Emily Gordine reporting from the West Bank.